The first hint of autumn had arrived in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. Jack Harmon stood on the porch of his newly purchased cabin, breathing in the crisp morning air that carried the scent of pine and distant wood smoke. At 52, he'd finally made good on the promise he'd made to himself decades ago, to leave behind the chaos of Chicago for something simpler, something real. 3 months into retirement, Jack was still adjusting to the silence. 28 years as an emergency room nurse had conditioned him to thrive in chaos, to find purpose in crisis. Out here, with nothing but the whisper of trees and occasional calls of birds, he sometimes felt adrift. "Just need to find my rhythm," he muttered, sipping coffee from a chipped mug his daughter Ellie had painted for him when she was 8. Now 26 and working as an environmental lawyer in Seattle, she worried about him being alone. "I'm fine," he assured her during their weekly video calls, making friends with the locals. This wasn't entirely true. Jack had exchanged pleasantries with a few neighbors and the staff at the general store 5 miles down the mountain, but nothing approaching friendship. The truth was, after decades of being surrounded by people at their most vulnerable, he'd developed a certain wariness of casual connections. The sound of rustling from the edge of his property caught his attention. The undergrowth near his woodpile shifted unnaturally. Jack set down his coffee and narrowed his eyes. Bears weren't uncommon in these parts, though his neighbors had assured him they generally kept their distance from humans. "Hello?" Jack called, immediately feeling foolish, as if a bear would respond. The rustling stopped. Jack reached for the flashlight he kept by the door, though the morning light made it unnecessary. Cautiously, he descended the 3 wooden steps from his porch, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. Probably just a raccoon, he reasoned, though something about the size of the disturbance suggested otherwise. As he approached, a low growl emanated from the bushes. Jack froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. His mind raced through the emergency protocols: back away slowly, no sudden movements, appear larger if possible. But curiosity, the same. Impulse that had made him an exceptional nurse, propelled him forward. He picked up a long stick from the ground, not as a weapon, but as a tool to gently part the foliage. What he saw made him drop the stick immediately. A dog, or what had once been a dog, lay partially concealed in the undergrowth. Its ribs protruded painfully beneath a matted coat that might have been golden or light brown beneath the layers of dirt and debris. One ear was torn, and a nasty gash ran along its flank, crusted with dried blood. The animal bared its teeth, eyes wild with fear, and something else Jack recognized instantly from his years in the ER: pain. "Hey there," Jack said softly, crouching, down but maintaining distance. "You're in rough shape, aren't you?" The dog growled again, but with less conviction. Its tail remained tucked tightly against its body. Jack assessed the situation with clinical detachment. The dog was severely malnourished and injured, but not actively bleeding. It seemed capable of moving, which suggested no spinal injury. The immediate risk was infection and dehydration. "I'm going to help you," Jack said, keeping his voice low and even. "But you've got to meet me halfway." He retreated to the cabin, aware of the dog's eyes tracking his movement. Inside, he gathered supplies: a bowl of water, leftover chicken from his dinner the previous night, a first aid kit, and an old blanket. Years of dealing with frightened patients had taught him that approach mattered as much as treatment. Back outside, Jack set the water bowl at the edge of the clearing, then backed away. "Your move," he said. For 15 minutes, nothing happened. Jack sat cross-legged on the ground, maintaining a respectful distance. Finally, hunger and thirst overcame fear. The dog emerged cautiously, legs trembling with the effort. It was larger than Jack had initially thought, perhaps a golden retriever mix, though its condition made it difficult to tell. The animal lapped, desperately at the water, stopping occasionally to check Jack's position. When the bowl was empty, Jack slowly reached for the container of chicken. The dog growled reflexively. "Easy," Jack murmured. "I'm just going to set this down and you can decide what to do next." He placed the chicken beside the water bowl and retreated again. The dog sniffed the air, then devoured the offering in a seconds. With food in its belly, the animal seemed to reassess the situation. It took a hesitant step toward Jack, then another. Jack remained perfectly still, his palm open and extended at ground level. "That's it," he encouraged. "I'm not going to hurt you." The dog stretched its neck, sniffing Jack's fingers. Then, to Jack's amazement, it dropped to the ground and rolled partially onto its side, exposing its belly, a gesture of submission and trust so unexpected that Jack felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Well, I'll be damned," he whispered, as he cautiously extended his hand to offer the gentlest of belly rubs. The dog's eyes closed briefly, in what looked remarkably like relief. Jack laughed softly. "You're full of surprises, aren't you? Let's get you cleaned up." As he carefully examined the animal, Jack found a frayed collar buried in the matted fur but no tags. This wasn't a wild animal that had never known human contact. This was someone's pet that had fallen on desperate times. "You've got a story," Jack said, gently probing the wound on the dog's flank, "and I've got time to listen." That evening, after a careful bath, treatment of wounds and more food, the dog, whom Jack had started calling Scout for lack of a better name, lay curled at the foot of Jack's bed. Every few minutes, Scout would lift his head, as if to confirm Jack was still there. "I'm not going anywhere," Jack assured him, "and neither are you, at least until we figure out where you belong." As darkness settled over the mountains, Jack realized he hadn't felt this sense of purpose since leaving the hospital. Tomorrow, he'd take Scout to the vet in town, ask around about missing dogs. But tonight, in the quiet of his cabin, the simple act of offering sanctuary felt like exactly what he'd come to these mountains to find. The veterinary clinic in Asheville was busier than Jack had anticipated for a Tuesday morning. Scout, now, somewhat cleaner but still pitifully thin, pressed against Jack's leg in the waiting room, eyeing the other pets and their owners with nervous vigilance. "It's all right," Jack reassured, stroking the dog's head. "We're just getting you checked." "Hout!" Dr. Melissa Chen, a woman in her mid-30s with an efficient manner and kind eyes, led them into an examination room. Scout balked at the threshold, and Jack had to gently coax him inside. "Found him in the woods near my cabin yesterday," Jack explained, as Dr. Chen examined the trembling animal. "He was in pretty rough shape." "I can see that," she said carefully, palpating Scout's abdomen. "He's severely malnourished, and these wounds are at least a week old. I'm also concerned about potential heartworm and tick-borne diseases, given where you found him." Jack nodded, unconsciously falling into the familiar rhythm of medical consultation. "I cleaned the lacerations with antiseptic and applied antibiotic ointment, but I was worried about internal injuries." Dr. Chen glanced up, reassessing Jack. "Medical background?" "ER nurse for 28 years, he replied. "Recently retired." "Well, you did good work," she said, returning her attention to Scout. "Let's check for a microchip before anything else." The scanner beeped affirmatively when passed over Scout's shoulder blades. "We've got a hit," Dr. Chen said, reading the EE display. "I'll contact the registry and see what information we can get." While they waited, Dr. Chen conducted a thorough examination, drawing blood and administering necessary vaccines. Scout endured it stoically, his eyes never leaving Jack. "He's bonded to you already," the vet observed. "Temporary arrangement," Jack said, though he felt an unexpected twinge at the words. "Just until we find his owners." Dr. Chen nodded non-committally and left to process the blood work and microchip information. Jack sat on the floor beside the examination table, allowing Scout to rest his head on his thigh. "We'll get you home," he promised, though the thought brought less comfort than he'd expected. 30 minutes later, Dr. Chen returned with a folder and a troubled expression. "I've got some information," she said, "but it's complicated. The microchip is registered to a family named Colton from Johnson City, Tennessee, about an hour and a half from here. But when I called the number in the registry, it was disconnected." Jack frowned. "How old is the registration?" "Almost 3 years," Dr. Chen replied. "I checked social media and found a post from about 2 months ago. The family was moving to Arizona and couldn't take their dog with them. They claimed they'd found him a new home, but you think they might have just abandoned him," Jackie finished, anger rising in his chest. Dr. Chen's expression remained professional, but her eyes hardened slightly. "It happens more than I'd like to admit, especially when people move cross-country." Jack looked down at Scout, who had dozed off, his head still resting trustingly against Jack's leg. "So what now? Does he go to a shelter?" "That would be the standard procedure," Dr. Chen confirmed. "There's a good no-kill shelter in Asheville that could take him, get him healthy and eventually adopt him out." Jack nodded, though something in him rebelled at the thought of Scout in a kennel, surrounded by strange dogs and unfamiliar people. "Or," Dr. Chen continued, watching Jack carefully, "you could consider fostering him while he recovers, maybe even adoption eventually." "I'm not really looking for a pet," Jack said automatically. Dr. Chen smiled slightly. "Sometimes they find us anyway." She handed him the folder. "Here's all his medical information and the contact details for the shelter, if that's the route you choose. He'll need follow-up care either way. Antibiotics for the infections, proper nutrition to get his weight up, and regular exercise once he's stronger." Jack thanked her and settled the bill, his mind preoccupied. Outside, he helped Scout into his truck, noting how the dog seemed to expect each movement, anticipating Jack's intentions with an uncanny awareness. On the drive back to the cabin, Jack found himself talking aloud, a habit he'd developed during his weeks of solitude. "This is temporary," he told Scout, who sat in the passenger seat, head tilted as if truly listening. "Just until you're stronger," Scout responded by cautiously resting his chin on Jack's thigh. "Don't get too comfortable," Jack warned, even as his free hand dropped to scratch behind the dog's ears. Back at the cabin, Jack established a routine. Mornings began with medication hidden in small portions of scrambled eggs, followed by gentle walks that grew progressively longer as Scout's strength returned. Afternoons were spent on the porch, Jack reading while Scout dozed in patches of sunlight. Evenings brought shared dinners and quiet companionship. A week passed, then two. Scout's wounds healed. His coat began to shine and the hollow spaces between his ribs gradually filled out. With improved health came personality, an unexpected playfulness, a particular way of greeting Jack each morning with what looked remarkably like a smile, a habit of carrying his leash to the door when he wanted a walk. Jack found himself talking, more explaining his actions, sharing memories, asking questions that needed no answers. "You know," he told Scout one evening as they sat watching the sunset from the porch, "I came out here to be alone, to figure out who I am without the hospital, without the constant crisis." Scout rested his head on Jack's knee, eyes fixed on his face. "The thing is," Jack continued, "I'm starting to think maybe I've been alone enough. 28 years of watching people at their worst moments, their most vulnerable. It makes you careful about connections." During their third week together, Jack finally called Ellie. She answered on the second ring, her voice tinged with the familiar worry he'd grown to both appreciate and resent. "Dad, I was just about to call you. How are things in the wilderness?" "Less wild than advertised," Jack replied, smiling as Scout appeared at the sound of his voice, tail wagging. "Actually, I've got someone I want you to meet." He turned the phone to show Scout, who tilted his head curiously at the screen. Ellie's surprised laugh filled the cabin. "Dad, you got a dog?" "More like he got me," Jack explained, recounting the story of finding Scout. "So are you keeping him?" Ellie asked when he'd finished. Jack hesitated. "I'm still deciding. The shelter has a space for him whenever I'm ready." "Ready to do what? Break both your hearts?" Ellie challenged. "Dad, I haven't seen you look this happy since before Mom died." The observation landed like a physical weight. Catherine had been gone for 5 years, but sometimes it felt like yesterday. They'd planned this retirement together, the cabin, the mountains, the quiet life. Her absence had hollowed out those dreams, leaving Jack with plans that felt more like obligations than aspirations. "He does make the place feel more like home," Jack admitted. That night, he finally called the shelter, but not to arrange a drop-off. Instead, he inquired about adoption procedures. The woman on the phone explained the process warmly, describing home visits and paperwork. "Is there any chance the original owners might come looking for him?" Jack asked, voicing a fear he hadn't fully acknowledged until that moment. "After this long and given the circumstances you've described, it's highly unlikely," she assured him. "But legally, You'd need to file a found dog report with animal control and wait a specified holding period before the adoption can be finalized. Jack completed the report the next day, providing all the information he had about Scout's origins. The officer who took the report seemed unimpressed by the likelihood of anyone coming forward. "Dogs get dumped in these mountains all the time," he said matter-of-factly. "Folks think they'll survive in the wild, or that someone else will take them in. Most aren't as lucky as your boy." As Jack and Scout drove home, a storm gathered over the mountains. By evening, rain lashed against the windows of the cabin and thunder rolled through the valleys. Jack built a fire in the wood stove, expecting Scout to be frightened by the storm. Instead, the dog seemed oddly energized, pacing to the window, then back to Jack, ears perked forward. "What is it, buddy?" Jack asked, setting aside his book. "Just the storm." Scout whined, pawing at the door. "How you can't seriously want to go out in this?" Jack said incredulously. The dog barked once, urgently. Something in Scout's demeanor, the focused intensity, the lack of fear, triggered Jack's old emergency instincts. He grabbed his raincoat and flashlight. 5 minutes, that's all. The moment Jack opened the door, Scout bolted into the darkness. "Scout!" Jack called, the rain immediately soaking through his jacket. "Come back!" He swept the flashlight across the yard, catching glimpses of Scout's tail as the dog headed toward the tree line. Cursing, Jack followed, rain plastering his hair to his forehead and mud sucking at his boots. His foot caught on an exposed root, nearly sending him sprawling, but decades of moving quickly through chaos had given him good reflexes. Scout had disappeared into the forest, but his occasional barks guided Jack forward. The flashlight beam bounced erratically through the trees, illuminating glistening leaves and rain-slick bark. "Scout!" Jack called again, concern edging into anger. "This isn't funny." A particularly loud bark drew him deeper into the woods, to a steep embankment he hadn't explored before. The flashlight beam caught Scout standing at the edge, looking down into what appeared to be a ravine, barking insistently. "What the hell are you doing?" Jack demanded, grabbing for Scout's collar. Then he heard it, a faint cry beneath the sound of rain and thunder. Human, not animal. Jack directed his flashlight down the embankment. Approximately 15 feet below, a teenage boy lay partially pinned beneath a fallen tree branch, his face pale with cold and pain. "Help!" the boy called weakly when the light hit his face. "Please." "I'm coming down!" Jack shouted over the storm. "Stay still!" Years of emergency medicine had taught Jack to assess and prioritize within seconds. The teenager was conscious and capable of speech. Good signs. The fallen branch across his lower body was concerning, but the boy's ability to call for help suggested his airway was clear and his lungs were functioning. Jack secured his flashlight between his teeth and began a careful descent down the muddy slope, using tree roots and rocks as handholds. Scout remained at the top, barking occasionally as if providing guidance. Reaching the bottom, Jack knelt beside the boy, who couldn't have been more than 16. Rainwater streamed down the teenager's face, mixing with tears of pain or relief. Perhaps both. "My name's Jack, I'm a nurse," he said, immediately checking the boy's pulse, rapid but strong. "Can you tell me your name?" "Mr. Marcus," the boy stammered through chattering teeth. "I can't feel my legs." Jack nodded, moving the flashlight methodically over the teenager's body. The fallen branch, actually a substantial section of tree, lay across Marcus's hips and thighs. The positioning suggested potential crushing injuries, but no immediate signs of catastrophic bleeding. "How long have you been out here, Marcus?" "Since this morning," the boy managed. "Went hiking, got lost, tried to take shelter when the storm hit." Jack shed his rain jacket and draped it over Marcus's upper body. "I need to check what we're dealing with here, then get help. This might hurt, but I need to know what's happening under that tree." Carefully, Jack explored the area where the branch pinned Marcus to the ground. The boy winced but didn't cry out. "Can you move your toes for me?" Jack asked. Marcus's face contorted with concentration, and beneath the sodden hiking boots, Jack detected slight movement. "Good," Jack said, genuine relief in his voice. "That's really good, Marcus. I don't think your spine is compromised, but we need to get this tree off you and get you warm." Jack assessed the branch. Too heavy for him to lift alone, especially at this angle. Marcus needed emergency services, but Jack's phone had no signal this deep in the ravine, and the storm would make rescue operations challenging. "Here's what's going to happen," Jack explained, projecting a calm he'd perfected in countless critical situations. "I'm going to climb back up and call for help. Then I'm coming right back down to stay with you until they arrive." Fear flashed across Marcus's face. "Don't leave me. Just for a few minutes," Jack promised. "My dog will stay with you." As if understanding, Scout carefully picked his way down the embankment, positioning himself beside Marcus. The boy reflexively reached for the dog's fur. "This is Scout," Jack said. "He's the one who found you." Marcus managed a weak smile as Scout gently licked his hand. "I'll be right back," Jack assured them both, beginning the slippery climb back to level ground. Once at the top, Jack ran through the rain toward his cabin, dialing 911 as soon as his phone showed bars. The dispatcher took the information efficiently, promising to dispatch search and rescue, but warning that the storm was complicating emergency responses throughout the county. "That boy can't wait," Jack insisted. "He's been exposed for hours and has potential crush injuries." "We'll do our best, sir, but it might be at least an hour." Jack gathered supplies quickly: blankets, first aid kit, water, energy bars, a tarp, and rope. Before heading back, he made one more call to his former colleague, Dr. Lena Wilson, who had retired to Asheville 3 years earlier. "Lena, it's Jack Harmon. I've got an emergency situation and could use your help and possibly your four-wheel drive." By the time Jack returned to the ravine, Marcus's condition had deteriorated. His responses were slower, his skin colder to the touch despite Scout's warmth pressed against him. "Help's coming," Jack assured him, rigging the tarp above them to provide some shelter from the relentless rain. He wrapped Marcus in emergency blankets, careful to avoid moving him unnecessarily. "Am I going to die?" Marcus asked, his voice small against the storm. "Not on my watch," Jack replied firmly. "I spent almost 30 years keeping people alive in much worse shape than you." To keep Marcus conscious and distracted, Jack encouraged him to talk. The boy explained that he'd recently moved to the area with his mother, following his parents' divorce. The hike had been an attempt to explore his new surroundings, to find something that felt like it belonged to him in this unfamiliar place. "I just wanted to see what was out here," Marcus said, his voice stronger as Jack monitored his vital signs. "Mum's working all the time trying to make ends meet. We don't know anybody yet." Jack nodded, recognizing the loneliness in the boy's words. The mountains can be welcoming or dangerous, depending on how you approach them. "Next time, bring a buddy and tell someone where you're going." "If there is a next time," Marcus said, grimly. "There will be," Jack assured him. "Scout seems to like you, and he's an excellent judge of character." As if in agreement, Scout rested his head gently on Marcus's shoulder. Nearly 45 minutes passed before Jack heard voices calling from above. Lena had arrived with her medical kit and four-wheel drive, accompanied by 2 search and rescue volunteers with proper equipment. The extraction was painstaking. The rescuers used hydraulic tools to lift the branch while Jack and Lena stabilized Marcus's lower body, alert for signs of crush syndrome as pressure was relieved. Scout watched attentively from a few feet away, occasionally whining when Marcus gasped in pain. "You've got a guardian angel in that dog," one of the rescuers commented, as they carefully transferred Marcus to a backboard. The journey up the embankment was treacherous, requiring all 4 adults working in coordination. Scout followed, somehow finding the easiest path and waiting at challenging sections as if offering guidance. "Remarkable animal," Lena observed, as they finally reached level ground. "Where did you find him?" "Other way around," Jack replied, helping secure Marcus for transport in the rescue vehicle. At the hospital, Jack provided the emergency department with a detailed handover, his professional demeanor returning effortlessly. Marcus's mother arrived shortly after, her face tight with fear and guilt. "I should have been home," she repeated, watching through the window as doctors assessed her son. "I picked up an extra shift. He said he was just going to watch TV. Kids rarely do what they say they're going to do," Jack offered gently. "But he's going to be okay. No fractures, just significant bruising and mild hypothermia." She turned to him, really seeing him for the first time. "You found him? In this storm?" My dog found him, Jack corrected. I just followed. Dawn was breaking as Jack finally returned to his cabin, Scout trudging tiredly beside him. Both were mud-streaked and exhausted. Jack filled Scout's water bowl and prepared a special breakfast of scrambled eggs with cheese and bits of bacon, a thank you that went beyond words. As they ate in companionable silence, Jack's phone rang. It was Dr. Chen from the veterinary clinic. "I got your message about completing the adoption paperwork," she said. "The holding period expires next week. Are you still interested in making it official?" Jack looked at Scout, who was watching him with those intelligent eyes that seemed to understand far more than should be possible. "Absolutely," Jack replied. "He's already home." 2 days later, Jack and Scout visited Marcus in the hospital. The boy's face lit up when Scout carefully placed his front paws on the edge of the bed, tail wagging. "The doctors said if you hadn't found me when you did, I might have lost my legs." "Or worse," Marcus said, scratching Scout behind the ears. "How did he know I was out there?" Jack shook his head. "Some things defy explanation. Scout was abandoned. Too left to fend for himself in these mountains. Maybe he recognized something in you." Marcus's mother, Sandra, invited Jack and Scout to dinner once Marcus was discharged. "The least we can do," she insisted. One dinner became a regular Sunday tradition. Marcus, recovering rapidly with the resilience of youth, began helping Jack with projects around the cabin. Sandra, discovering Jack's extensive medical background, sought his advice on pursuing nursing education herself. As summer transitioned to fall, Jack's life settled into rhythms he hadn't anticipated when he'd first moved to the mountains seeking solitude. Morning walks with Scout, weekly calls with Ellie, who was planning a Christmas visit to meet the dog who had completely transformed her father. Tutoring Sandra through her prerequisite courses. Teaching Marcus about safety and navigation in the wilderness. One crisp October evening, as Jack and Scout sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in amber and gold, Ellie called unexpectedly. "Dad, I've been thinking," she began without preamble. "What if I transferred to the firm's Asheville office? They've been trying to expand their environmental law practice in the region, and with everything happening with the national forest boundaries." Jack felt something expand in his chest, a sensation he recognized after months of healing as hope. "That would be wonderful, sweetheart," he said sincerely. "There's plenty of room here until you find your own place." "And Scout wouldn't mind. The company?" Jack laughed, watching as Scout's ears perked up at the sound of his name. "Scout believes the more the merrier." After ending the call, Jack sat in the gathering dusk, Scout's head heavy and trusting on his lap. He thought about the strange paths that had led him here. Not to the solitude he'd thought he wanted, but to something richer and more complex. A tapestry of connections that had begun the moment a wild-looking animal had emerged from the bushes, and, against all odds, asked for nothing more complicated than kindness and belly rubs. "You knew what you were doing all along, didn't you?" Jack murmured, scratching that same belly that had first been tentatively offered in trust. Scout sighed contentedly, his eyes closing in what Jack had come to recognize as the closest thing to a smile a dog could manage. The darkness gathered around the cabin, but for the first time since Catherine's death, it didn't feel empty. Jack had come to the mountains looking for silence, and found instead a different kind of conversation, one spoken in paw prints and wagging tails, in a teenager's growing confidence, in a woman's determination to build a new career, in a daughter's decision to come home. It had all started with what looked like a wild animal, until it begged for belly rubs and in doing so offered Jack a way back to the world.